Hotep, Ashe, hello, welcome. Thank you for tuning in to this installment of the Boozadelic Chronicles. My name is Clark, and today what I want to do is share a little something with you. So one of my viewers had a question. They hear me referring to Amun Ra, and sometimes I'll say God, and they want to know what the differences was. So that kind of inspired what today's episode is going to be about. So what I'm going to do is, and I'm going to share the reasons why I decided to make the shift from organized religion back to a spiritual-based form of worship. Now, this transition wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a gradual process, and I would say that I'd have to go back, really if I go back to my days in college after I took a world religion class, but more recently, back in 2010, a good friend of mine who I worked with when I worked in the school district and also when I worked at TriMet passed away. And while he was dealing with his cancer, I was sitting there, I was having this conversation with him, and I mentioned, God's got you, Jesus has your back. And he said, brother, I jumped off that slave ship a long time ago. And I thought, wow, I was kind of taken back by it. And so at that time, I really didn't have the understanding of what he meant. So several months later, he passed away, unfortunately. And I went to his celebration of life. And there was this brother there by the name of Ascari who did the celebration. And it was just all based on African spirituality. I mean, descending off, to the next dimension of life was just amazing and really powerful. And so that kind of raised some questions, and I said I got to look more into this because that was a part of me that was unknown. And like most Africans in America, we are indoctrinated into Christianity. As a matter of fact, I think 80% of us here in the United States of African descent are actually considered Christian. And on the continent of Africa now get this, prior to 1910, less than 10% of the people on the African continent identified as Christians. You had some Muslims, but most of them practiced their old African spirituality. Now, through the process of slavery, colonization, Jim Crow, educational system, we have been brainwashed to the point where we have forgotten who we are. And so I consider this a wake-up call, and I can get back to who I was prior to the introduction from the Western world. So the first and obvious question is, how did I become a Christian? Well, I was born into Christianity. It was just something that I was accepted. I was told by my parents, who were told by their parents, who were told by their parents, who were actually on the plantation. And I did the research. I traced my ancestry back and found out that my great-grandmother actually was born on a plantation in Louisiana. And then I looked at my DNA. I did the ancestry DNA. I traced back my roots to, a little bit of Nigeria, a little bit of the the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And so after doing years of research and reading, I find out that my spirituality, without a doubt, would have been that of my ancient ancestors. Now, growing up, and to the Christian doctrine and going to church, I never did have quite the understanding of what I was really doing there. I knew it was something that was expected of us. We have to be thankful because God gave us life. And, as I would sit there, I was always one of those type of kids, I guess it was a gift I was born with, that I was a critical thinker from an early age. And, after I was old enough to really understand some of the stuff they were talking about, I started to ask questions. Now, most of these questions I asked were to myself. I didn't dare ask my mom, who is now a retired ordained minister in the Episcopal Church. I didn't dare ask my grandmother or my father because I knew the typical answer was going to be, boy, because that's what God said, it's in the book. And so, but I still knew that there was more to it. A lot of the stuff made sense, but there was a lot of the stuff that didn't make any sense. And especially when I read the parts about slavery, and I think it was in Ephesians, where they say, slaves, be obedient to your masters as your masters are to God. And that really resonated with me. And I can think about when I was growing up and I would see, footage of these old, films that you would see on the History Channel, and you would see that these so-called Christian folks would go to church on Sundays in their Sunday best, and then they would come outside and witness the public hangings or slave auctions. And I was just saying, wow, something is just not right here. And so as I got older and I started doing the research, and I say, aha, religions, not just Christianity, but Islam, Judeo-Christian, you name it, they are all based on the original spirituality. However, they are fragments of that spirituality. So how do we go from there to where we are now? Well, let's go back to 325 AD. And Constantine had this guy named Eusebius. So this Eusebius character takes some of the original Megineder and starts to form what we now know as Christianity. So this Eusebius character was Constantine's right-hand man. And you can ask any pastor, priest that's actually gone to seminary, and they can tell you the same story because they were taught this when they were in the seminary. And so we got to understand that what Constantine's right-hand man did in 325 AD, he gathered 88 bishops and they formed what was the First Council of Nicaea. Now, I'm not going to give you all a very deep and in-depth look at this. This is something I want you to research for yourself. So what the Council of Nicaea did, they determined what books were going to be allowed into this Bible of this newly formed religion called Christianity. And so there's several books that were admitted. Now, right here, I got the lost books of the Bible, the forgotten books of Eden. These are 8 books that are actually missing out the Bible. And you see on this Bible, you see the people depicted on this Bible, people of color, Africans. And so what Constantine wanted to do, and with the help of his boy Eusebius, is they wanted to completely erase the history of Africans. And so they did so by changing the symbols and their interpretation of the original carvings that were on the wall, the principles of Ma'at and all that. Even if you take a look at the 10 Commandments, you will find that the 10 Commandments are based on the 42 principles of Ma'at, straight plagiarized. And so why did they want to do this? Because Constantine knew that not only could he control people physically with this religion, he could also control them mentally. And this was done solely for the purposes of political and economic gain. So for those of you that are going to sit here and say that, well, the Bible is the Word of God, let's look at that for a moment. Remember when I said that the Christianity and Islam, Judeo-Christian, they are fragments on the periphery of the original spirituality? This is what I mean. So let's take a look at the Bible. Now, the Bible was written over a course of 2,000 years by 66 different authors. There's 66 different books within that Bible. So over the course of 2,000 years, 66 different people have a chance to put their spin on it. Something else that we need to consider. You know about King James, right? King James would have made Adolf Hitler look like Santa Claus. So about that time, the Pope said that the Africans were not human because we did not possess a soul. So that gave them justification to put us into slavery and to rape, kill, and do whatever they wanted to do as they pleased. And so King James comes along and he organizes this council because he decided he wanted a book written that would make him feel good about the things that he was doing, and so the people could look upon him as favorable. So King James, like I said, he made Adolf Hitler look like Santa Claus. He was a murderer, a rapist, just a straight up criminal. But yet that is the foundation for the religion that many of us to this day follow blindly. So with this influence of the Christian doctrine, and as the time just continued to roll by, you had slavery, the colonization. Pretty soon we no longer have knowledge of ourselves, and we got away from our spirituality. And so subconsciously, now that they made the image of the God that we once understood as being the totality of all things, becomes a person, and a white person who was also that same person that was taking our land, taking us into slavery. And so this was what she called fear-based programming. Now, to give you an example of more recent history of how well this fear-based programming has worked, I want you to look at the Bible, and it gives the description of Jesus, and it said that he had a skin that was like bronze. He had hair that was like wool, eyes that were like coal. So how do we go from this to the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus that most blacks look to as their savior? Good question. It's called mind control. And so what the colonizers and the Europeans did, they took the imagery, the symbolism of our spirituality, and made it favorable to them. Now, everybody has a right to view their God through their own cultural lens. However, this was used as a political and economic ploy against our people. This is why I decided that I needed to take a real look at what I was doing, what I was learning. That's why there was this disconnect, because I knew that deep down within my side, something just wasn't right about what I was being taught. And so that's what sparked the urge for me to get a deeper look and to do the research and find out about my history. And so how has it transformed my life? Well, growing up under the doctrine of Christianity, I was on again, off again. Yes, I always believed that we had this higher power and that there's this God, but I just didn't buy into the sky daddy or the concept and the ideologies that we were subjugated to. So I decided I wanted to do the research. I wanted to find out more about it. And once I learned that our spirituality was based on an understanding of the principles of the universe, that we learned about the cycle of life through nature, the concept of heaven and hell went out the window. I understand now that that was created as a fear tactic, as a way of controlling people. Because if you go back and take a look at what our spirituality taught us, it was that life is just a circle. There is no beginning, there is no end. And to fully understand this, one must actually get into African cosmology. So now that we're on this pandemic, folks, do yourself a favor, do the research if you have any questions. I mean, if you're happy of what you're doing now and it works for you, by all means, keep it up. But if you're hungry like I was and just wanted to have a deeper understanding of where it all originated from, then do the research. Find out about African cosmology. Find out about spirituality. Learn how to read the language so you can decipher and read the truth for yourself. So our ancestors were able to figure out life and have this connection with the Creator just based on observing nature. And if you take you look at a plant, and they observe the plant in the springtime, they see this life coming out of it, out of the ground. Then in the wintertime, it withers up and it dies. But then the next spring, it comes back. So that's where this perpetual circle of life becomes so important in the African culture. So Asar was the ruler of Upper Egypt, and he went to Lower Egypt and got killed along the way. So his new bride, Aset, went looking for her husband and found that he was cut into several pieces. It was actually, she recovered 13 pieces, and there was 14 total pieces. So these 13 pieces she bound together and created what was called the first mummy. And so as the legend goes from mythology, from the Kemetic mythology, is that the spirit of Asar came back down and impregnated his virgin wife. They hadn't had a chance to consummate the marriage yet, and gave birth to Haru. So then you have this Eusebius guy that comes along several years later and actually sees this story as depicted in the Meginetter, which is basically mythology. There is no real physical truth to that. That is just the mythological characters to explain a concept. And so when Eusebius translated this, that's how we get the story of Jesus, Joseph, and Mary, and the resurrection story and the birth of Jesus. So Eusebius translate the story of Asar, Aset, and Haru, and that's what became known by Christians as the story of Jesus. Now, how do we get to the 25th? Well, if you go to the cosmology and the mythology, and then you have the astrological component. And so during that time period, they say, was it December 21st, you're at the winter solstice, where, the day is equally as short as it is long. And so then you have a 3-day period of when where the sun basically sits still, and then on that next day it moves again, and that happened to be the 25th, and that was the actual birth of Haru according to mythology. So that's where we get Jesus' birthday being on December 25th. Now, I know this is something that is completely different from everything that you've been told and sold in the concepts of Christianity or Islam. But one thing I want you to understand, that any priest, minister that's gone to seminary has learned of where these stories come from and will tell you. My mom's a minister. She told me about the origins of this stuff. And so that's how and why that religions, just like the spirituality, we use symbolism and mythology to describe concepts that help us govern everyday life. Those of you who watch my video have probably seen this Ankh. Some people wonder what it is. I'm going to tell you. This right here represents the womb. This right here represents the children. This right here represents the man. So this is life energy. If you found this information on this video useful, go ahead and punch that like button. Go ahead and punch that subscribe button. And you can catch me on Facebook. You can also catch me in the Instagram world too, folks. And one last thing I'd like to share with you is, if you want to go out there and do the research yourself, you have the internet, but a book I'd like to recommend, The Destruction of Black Civilization. This takes a look of from 4500 BC to 2000 AD, and it really gives a lot of insight of how we got to where we are today. Also, as far as spirituality, brothers and sisters, this book right here, Pyramids of Power, this book right here, I have an audio portion of this too, where I listen to it every day for my affirmations, but this is really a good guide to help you wake up your consciousness, connect you with the universal laws that exist out there, and live in divine order. So, 2 books that you must put on your list if you really want to get in depth and look at it. And also, don't forget, if you're curious about what books are not in the Bible, this right here has the missing books. Ankh Ujal Seneb. Peace out. Have a great day.